again, everybody. Welcome to Safest Family on the Block, where knowledge is power. I'm your host, Jason, and with me today is Linda Sanderson. Hello, Linda.
Hello there. How are you?
I'm doing real well. How about your own self?
I am well too.
I'm really excited to have you today because, as with most of our guests, you come to us with a real powerhouse resume. I'll tell folks a little bit about you right now. Linda here is well acquainted with crime. She worked as a crime reporter in her early career, covering all the major crime stories for a newspaper in Contra Costa County, California, which is a large county in the Bay Area, just east of San Francisco. And she went on to become a gang expert for defense attorneys working in that same county's public defender's office. And she worked on several very large cases, and mostly in the Richmond area, which is a city with the highest homicide rates in the 1990s and 2000s. Eventually, that work got her promoted to chief investigator, and that was a job title she held until her retirement in 2018. She continues to work for men who've been arrested for gang-related homicides in Richmond. That's a lot of experience with crime from both sides of the fence, and we're having you on here today to talk about how that knowledge can translate to families and their own safety, about not being targets, about how some of the unique challenges of walking around with kids creates both some opportunities and some vulnerabilities in terms of security. So I'm going to get out of your way and just ask you, what should we know first?
I'm going to start by talking about different neighborhoods. I'm going to condense it to three different kinds of neighborhoods,
Okay.
which kind of create the setting for crime. The inner city neighborhoods, and often they're pockets on the outside of the city where people are very poor and they're deprived, and they have this need to try and get something that they can't get very easily. In the Bay Area, those neighborhoods are like in the middle of the city, the Tenderloin and Hunters Point, but then they're also on the outskirts of the city and in the suburbs even. And one of them is Richmond, which was where I spent a lot of my career. It's kind of notorious for its homicide rate. And especially in the 1990s, it was ridiculously high. But and then these people in these neighborhoods are constantly sort of towing the boundaries of right and wrong in order to get what they need. So then there's that neighborhood. Then comes the secondary sort of intermediary neighborhood, which I'll call category 2 neighborhood. Those are the neighborhoods that are not that far from these other neighborhoods, but they are where people have nicer homes and where better things, and they've worked hard to get those things. And they are families that have decided to stay in a more sort of city-ish kind of environment. They often put their children in private schools because the public schools are the same schools that the people in category 1 go to, and so sometimes those schools are not as well staffed, and so they're doing everything in category 2 neighborhoods to look after themselves. They're used to their bikes being stolen, car broken into, homes that are sometimes burglarized, and they are more on guard and alert. They look after themselves with maybe cameras in front of their homes and security systems. They just have sort of a more awareness of their environment. And then category 3 homes they tend to be sort of like the suburbs, where a lot of folks with families move to. They are places where the school districts are better, the schools are better, the homes are bigger. There's also there are backyards and sidewalks. And they're just sort of more relaxed neighborhoods. And consequently, in these neighborhoods, people tend to let down their guard. They might not even worry about cameras and security gates because nothing bad happens here. You know, this is where people go to raise their families, and older parents live after their kids have gone on to marry or go to college, or usually go to college in these communities. And the older parents continue to live in these neighborhoods even after their kids resort and go back to neighborhood or category 2 environments, because those environments for young people are, a little more vibrant, a little more spirited, let's say. And I'm going to talk mostly about category 3 neighborhoods. This kind of neighborhood is, well, let's just say, going back to the category 1 neighborhood, which is going to interact with category 3 neighborhoods when we come to crime. The category 1 neighborhoods, I want to make sure that I'm clear that not all poor folks are criminals, but a lot of criminals do come from category 1 neighborhoods. Those folks who have abandoned whatever they see as the legal way of getting what they need and are resorting to the illegal way, usually prey on the neighbors either within their community or just on the periphery of their community. And that's the way it kind of used to always be. And their crime targeting the people in their own neighborhood, which was what continued to reinforce those neighborhoods as crime-ridden. Their work in the neighborhoods that are category 2 is what keeps category 2 neighbors and families more on their toes. It turns out it's not a far drive from a category 1 neighborhood to a category 3 neighborhood. And especially if you're a sophisticated criminal, or one who is just desperate, or one who's just a bad guy, you just stop by a category 2 neighborhood, rob a car, and a nice car. So then you get to category 3 neighborhood and you sort of fit in. You're riding down the road in your nice ride, and you're set.
So it sounds like, from the perspective of a criminal, the category 3 neighborhood has less security and more money inside.
Absolutely.
So if they can get there, that's a much better choice than category 2, which is going to have more security, probably a higher likelihood of a firearm in the home with somebody who knows how to use it, much
Correct.
higher risk for much less reward than just driving for an extra 10 minutes.
Right. What I have seen in the work that I do, and let me be clear that my work has been to work for these guys. So the people who are arrested are folks that I'm pretty familiar with. So they, especially the younger criminals, and these would be the ones who are generally feeding maybe a drug enterprise, or or maybe they're just more gratuitous kind of criminals who want to wear all the nice clothes that they see others wearing. And the other thing to know about the criminals is that especially among the younger folks, and they're the ones who tend to do the most damage, they're usually pretty high when they get in your face, when they come into your neighborhood. They're not very predictable, and they often have guns. They often carry guns everywhere they go, this kind of criminal, and it's very scary. So they are, incredibly frightening for the unprepared families in category 3. I want to talk about how one of the most common spots where the crime occurs is as a person is getting into or out of a nice car. More often, the nice cars are where the criminals focus their crime as someone is getting out of them, because obviously they've had an opportunity to observe the car, and they are seeing who gets out of them. Let me back up a bit. In the Bay Area, some of the worst crime that's happened of this sort has been folks who are driving Lamborghinis with the flip up doors. What are those called? Scissor doors or something? I have only seen one in my life once, but they exist. And then, you know, even just like BMWs and Mercedes, they are driving home at night. And a lot of the sort of suburban homes might be on a little road or in a neighborhood where houses are quite spread out. And they pull into their driveway as they're either fumbling for their you know, garage door opener, or maybe they've just decided to take the groceries out while they're in the driveway, or they've raised the car, the garage door, but they're still in the garage with it open. That's where a lot of the focal points are for the criminal. They will approach then sometimes they followed the car from Oakland or from somewhere where it's a little more open. Recently, a man in a Bentley was driving back from Oakland into the suburbs and was followed and robbed of well, they went into his house and burglarized the whole house.
Well, it seems like from this point, you've got 2 points of vulnerability in this scenario. One is when you're in your neighborhood and someone from a more criminal neighborhood has come to yours, or when you yourself go from category 3 to category 2 to perhaps watch a show downtown or end up in category 1 because it's a restaurant you like a lot and then get followed back.
Right.
And so sounds like in the latter case where you've gone into a neighborhood with more crime and are followed back, it almost sounds like one of the best pieces of advice for travel, you know, travel safety that I've ever heard is just look broke. And if the broker you look, the less of a target you are. That if you have if you have that Bentley, if you have that Mercedes, you know, you probably have the money to also have a Ford Focus to drive into town.
The one that the teenage children use.
Yeah, borrow your kid's car, I suppose. But to make yourself less attractive a target so that the bad guy won't follow you to your neighborhood. Now, in terms of bad guys who come to the neighborhood, what are some things there that we can do to make our house, our car, less attractive as a target?
Well, so the other, most crime in these neighborhoods does not just happen randomly. It happens, it rarely happens when you're in your home. In your home, there are too many unknowns and unpredictables for a criminal to just approach a house they know nothing about and decide to enter it and do a home invasion robbery. I mean, home invasion robberies happen generally in places where people are growing weed in the backyard, or they have, the criminals have figured out one way or another that there's a lot of money in the house. Now, one way they can tell there's a lot of money in the house is, of course, if the house is, you know, a multi-million-dollar home, but that it has to be a little bit more, you've had to let your guard down somewhere outside the home for your home to become a target. So I really think that the most important thing is when it happens a lot at Costco parking lots, shopping mall parking lots. These are places where, you know, there's like oodles of cars just parked in rows for rows back. And then there are the people who have the nice cars and they're going to park them in the back because they don't want to get door dents, right? I have a friend who always does that. We have to like hike 2 miles to the store after we've parked to look after her nice car. That is sort of an open invitation for a criminal because, well, look, there's a nice car and it's not where everybody is. It's back here sort of in the corner. So they will look inside, see if there's anything to take, or if it's a car that they can easily jumpstart or, you know, use their key mechanisms, they'll just take it. But more importantly, the problem comes when a girl carrying her fancy purse, Gucci or a Prada or a knockoff. And you know, it's probably more often you're carrying a knockoff, but that's pretty common. And you're walking to your car in the Costco parking lot, where there's a million cars and lots of you know, aisles. These people work in groups so that somebody's watching people walking from the store to their car and somebody else is checking the area around different rows to be sure that there's not people there watching. And if bingo, if you walk with your Gucci purse to one of the rows where nobody else is getting in and out of their car at the moment, they'll take your purse even before you get in your car. Or as you're getting into the car, which creates a little bit of subterfuge because there's a little bit of noise and there's some, you know, action. So people just figure someone's getting their groceries or their you know, Gucci bags into the car. They'll strike as you're getting into your car. You bend down and you're putting your groceries in and you've become the target. So obviously the most important thing here is as you go between your vehicle and the store or work or whatever it is, the restaurant, the bar, be very aware of your surroundings. Park close to where you intend to go in. Risk a door ding, you know. It's better than getting robbed.
And to the point that you made, if that's your son or daughter, make sure that we talk to them about that, about if you did happen to get your son a very nice designer brand jacket. I don't know what designers make good jackets. Or you got your daughter a Gucci purse for her birthday, that these are for when you go out on a special occasion. These are not your day-to-day carries. This is not what you want to take to Costco. And again, don't buy your kid a Mercedes. There's a lot of reasons not to buy your kid a Mercedes, but this is one of them.
Well, you know, I see that it's not fair to say that people shouldn't have nice things and drive the cars that they want to drive. Just understand that you have more than other people have. And there are people around us who take note of that and will target you because of that. So you have to be extra careful. If you have a fancy car, this happened recently. A guy was going to work. He was a lawyer. He had a nice car. He parked his car in just this open parking lot outside of a small office building where he worked. He got out. He was wearing a $5,000 Rolex watch. Of course, these guys didn't know about the watch, but they certainly took it. What they knew about was his fancy car and the fact that there were no cameras. And there was it was early in the morning. There was just this one guy getting out of his very fancy car. So if you have enough money to buy the kind of car that he had and I'm not saying the car, I'm just trying to be a little bit vague here because these are real people and real cases. He should have had enough money to put at least a camera up on the entrance to his office, because I can tell you also that criminals do check out where cameras are. They're very aware. In today's world, the police are taking down these criminals by using all kinds of technology. And one is cameras. The other is tracking their phones. The other is license plate readers. There are license plate readers that most people don't know about as you go in and out of most affluent and even sort of middle class more and more communities. So those readers give police the license plate of people coming in and out. Now the problem with that, two problems. It only shows the license plate. It doesn't show the car of the bad guy. And also, people who do these kind of robberies that are a little bit more organized, they switch out the license plates on the cars that they steal. So you walk out in the morning and get in your car. Sometime later that day, the police call and say, do you have your car? And yes, I have my car. Would you go check and see if you have the license plate on it? People will go back and they go, yeah, no, I don't. They go, okay, well, have your license plate. It's on a car that we just stopped or just found abandoned. And we believe that it was involved in blah, 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 blah. So I think that people, again, need to be careful. It's sort of like you have to have return to the category 2 families obsession with safety. Hide your belongings, always lock your doors, don't flaunt your wealth. If you drive a Bentley, make sure you have a place to park it that's secure. I also think about like parents when they first have children tend to become safety obsessed. It's just common human behavior that your protective genes just go full on, and you're telling your children, get off your cell phone, watch both ways when you cross the street, don't run downhill, hold my hand. Now you can't tell your kids when they get older, hold my hand, but you can kind of remind them to of all the rules that they learned when they were little, and just rehearse.
So that brings up a very interesting point where if I'm in a category 2 neighborhood, for example, with my kids, on the one hand, those kids are chaos, and these professional criminals don't like chaos. Because they like things to go nice and smooth. They like the predictable outcome, as little risk, as little weirdness as possible. On the other hand, kids are distracting the hell out of me, which makes me in some ways a more attractive target. Do you have any insights on what's the general idea in a criminal's mind about families, and what are some ways that I can make my family a less attractive target if I'm out and about with them?
Well, I think the good news is that even the worst of the criminals generally stay away from children. It's some unwritten code that children should be off bounds. So in a sense, your children around you serve in some ways as a protective cloak to the bad guys. You make a good point, though, that children can distract you, and that could lead to issues as well. But
so it seems like I'm unlikely to be mugged if I'm with my kids.
I would keep your kids with you.
Yeah.
Come on, Sally, we're going to go to Costco.
But on the other hand, I might forget to to lock my car because there was a small thing, and then the bad guys will take that vehicle while the kids are not on site. Does that seem about reasonable?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Always, no matter what your children are doing, still lock your car. Still take anything of value with you. If, you know, there's a Gucci bag in the car, it doesn't matter where the car is, or, you know, if the Gucci bag is not on you, just assume it's going to be taken. If you have something nice that you're traveling with, whether it's a purse or a camera or your favorite, you know, necklace or a nice fancy phone, keep it on you and protect it on you. If you go into a restaurant, don't put your purse on the back of the chair. You know, these are really like pretty, you know, elementary components of staying safe, but I think we all do it. And again, you do it more in category 3 neighborhoods than you do in category 2 and 1 neighborhoods, because you are not, you have your guard down. And you just think, oh, this doesn't happen here.
Well, that makes sense. And what I'm hearing you say is that it does in fact happen here. In fact, the neighborhoods are targeted by the smarter criminals from the other neighborhoods, because that's where the money is and that's where the risk is less.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now, in terms of my house, so I'm imagining a situation where a couple of younger guys, maybe mid-20s, early 20s guys, they boost a BMW and they come into a nicer neighborhood and they're looking for a house to rob. What are some things I can do to my house so that while they're driving by, they're not going to choose my house? They're going to choose the house that doesn't have these things, that's a little further down the street. I mean, I hate to throw my neighbor down, you know, under the bus, but that's the reality.
So have a camera. Have a camera at your front door. Those little Nest cameras or whatever it is, those come in quite handy. They're being used more and more, and surveillance cameras they're not that expensive, and they will be a deterrent. And also after the fact, they will help the police find who did this to you. I know some folks who just get the trappings of security businesses, or, you know, they'll get the signs. They'll, you know, say that this house is protected by blah, 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 blah. One of the houses I moved into when I was younger was, it had this security thing above the garage door. And I knew there wasn't anything inside it or attached to it. But I always thought, oh, that's interesting. And one day this man drove by and he said, how's your house doing? And I'm like, what? And he goes, well, a friend of mine used to live there, and he that's my security company's box that's up above your garage. And I'm like, really? He goes, yeah, how's it worked out? And I go, so far so good, you know. Nobody's, I mean, also maybe like, you know, have like the worst looking house on the street, you know. But you know, you don't want to change your standard of living just for the criminals, but maybe, you know, make the wealth more apparent inside the house than on the outside.
Well, that makes sense. What you're saying about the dummy cameras and stuff, I remember in the 80s and the 90s and even the early 2000s, when security cameras were quite expensive.
Right.
It was really common, especially for businesses, to have just a fake empty camera there, not attached to anything, recording nothing.
Right.
Because most of the time, the criminals aren't going to verify whether or not your camera is real. They're going to go find a place that doesn't have a camera.
Right.
Which isn't, okay.
On the other hand, make sure it doesn't have like cobwebs hanging off of it, like it's all rusty and clearly, you know, is from a decade ago or two.
Yeah. No, that makes good sense. Now, how about my car? Other than, you know, not necessarily driving a luxury automobile into rough neighborhoods, or if I do, into a place with secure parking, are the things I can do to make my car less attractive?
Don't drive a black Lexus Infinity.
Okay.
That
Note to self.
that seems to be a car, and it doesn't have to be new. It can be, 5 years old. That, at least in the Bay Area, and obviously, things are different in different locales. That is the bad guy's car of choice.
So step one, earn enough money to afford a black Lexus Infinity. Step two, don't buy that.
Exactly.
Okay.
Or have a garage, park it in the garage.
Okay.
Yeah, just
Okay.
be more aware.
Interesting.
Also, and this is not fair again to personal taste and everything, but black or dark cars, and they have to be usually a certain kind of car, are also easier hits for. I think it must have something to do with the criminal's personal taste, and also they're just more a dime a dozen. A yellow car is probably going to do fine out there in the world of crime, because nobody's going to want to take a yellow car. But again, who wants to drive a yellow car? So.
That makes sense.
So that's sort of a somewhat useless recommendation. Again, also, I think it really, rather than change your car, change your habits, and just make sure where you park it. If you just have an ordinary car, and again, you can check the internet for what's the car most often stolen. And it probably differs community by community, but just be aware that there are certain cars, and I'm not good on this because I'm not a car expert. I always have to ask somebody about that. But there are cars that are much easier to break into. I think they're Hondas and Toyotas and cars that people commonly have. But there's some that are worse than others.
Interesting.
Also, catalytic converters are often stolen, and there's a whole industry of stealing catalytic converters, and there's also a whole industry that's popped up on how to secure your catalytic converter, which I can't say, let alone have, but
yeah.
but
well, catalytic converters, they have some rare earth metals in them that have a huge value per ounce of metal.
Yes.
And they're on the outside of your car.
They are, but they are easy. You can easily secure them. I actually once read about it, just something I was working on, that that somebody can install just like a metal rod or something underneath it with screws, and it just keeps it makes it harder to take.
Okay.
Yeah, and just remember getting in and out of your car.
You've got this great, exciting book project that is actually how you and I met talking about, and I'd love for our audience to hear about what it is and what's going on with it.
When I worked in the public defender's office, I worked for a lot of young men who lived in Richmond, and they had a lot of interfacing with crime, let's just say. One of the people who I worked for was named Willie Jasper, and he grew up in one of the neighborhoods, one of the worst neighborhoods in Richmond, and there are quite a few, and as I mentioned, it's a pretty dangerous community, sort of notoriously. And I started, while I worked in that community, realizing that it was sort of an art to be a kid in that community and just survive. And because I had so much interaction with these families and and young men growing up, I sort of became sympathetic to what it was like to live like that. The book is a story about how people, and particularly like it is about Willie Jasper, how he lived his life on the streets, and why he kept this incredible loyalty to his neighborhood, and why the hood became his safety net. Why, when he had an opportunity to, he was actually shipped out for a couple years to a boys' home, and he did pretty well there. As soon as he got out, he went back to the hood. He went back to his street and his folks, and it was a horrendous setting. It was a horrendous neighborhood. His mother was a drug addict, was rarely around, and his father was in prison. His older brothers were all slinging guns, and he got into that himself. When he was 7, and that's sort of how the book opens, he was standing on the neighborhood stoop. It was midnight. He was 7, and he was sitting next to a guy who he thought of as his protector, and someone drove up, got out of the car, walked up the steps, shot his man standing next to him in the head and killed him. And Willie watched, him bleed out on the sidewalk. When the police got there, everybody had run, including Willie, and nobody would tell the police anything about what had happened. And it was a gang killing, and that sort of informed his childhood. And he sought after that to surround himself by the guys who could protect him. And it's pretty amazing story. He eventually killed someone himself. He's in prison, and it's sort of his story of what happened during those years that led up to him killing somebody, and what's happening now. And he will get out of prison actually next year. So it's a sad but very informative book about also the city of Richmond, and how what role Richmond, the city and the government and the system that poor people live under affects the outcome that occurs in this book.
And if any of our viewers want more information, we'll have a link in the show notes where they can contact you and find out when that book's coming out and where they can get a copy.
Okay, it's called True to the Hood.
True to the Hood. Excellent. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. I'm personally excited to read it. I've had a little taste from some work we've done together on that, and I do think it's going to be a valuable and important book, especially in light of some of the things that are happening right now in the culture, in our culture and in our society, and some things that are coming to light, and some new ways we're looking at approaching what causes crime from both sides. I'll be very interested to see how this plays a role in that. But
I before we get to I'm sorry.
No,
before we get to the what you can do, what you do after you've become a target, I have one quick thing that sort of follows what you just said. Because of the obvious issues of racial injustices in our country, and that and the effect of racial injustice on the division of wealth in our world. The poor folks in our communities still tend to be brown and Black people. And as any Black man who's ever gotten out of his car in a category 3 neighborhood could tell you, you can barely get across the street without people thinking that you are going to hurt them, that you're a threat to them. And while racial inequalities are still present in our lives, this racist profile of Black and brown people will continue to challenge us to differentiate between the bad guys without misjudging people of color. So I just wanted to say that because, I mean, I didn't talk about it, but obviously one of the things on people's minds when they talk about safety is what kind of people do I need to look at? And that's just sort of an unfortunate piece of the whole world of safety.
Yeah, and it's that's not a problem I'm trying to solve in this podcast because I do not have superpowers. It is a deeply complex thing that we can all just do our part on as best we can personally, and hope we come up with some better solutions as a society moving forward. There's a word, or we should invent one, about just how terrible it is.
It's a conundrum.
Yeah, conundrum. There we are. It's a conundrum. Mystery wrapped in an enigma, as they once said.
Yes.
But in terms of when one becomes a target, if you are confronted, what are some of the best strategies for handling that safely, especially as a parent or with your family?
Do not resist. Talk as little as possible. Particularly if the person has a weapon, assume that they might use it. Groups, criminals who work in groups, and again, we're mostly talking about older teenagers, young adults, they will present the biggest danger because we all know that people behave usually at their worst in groups. A possibility that something's going to trigger the person with the gun, and next thing you know, there's a shooting. And obviously, nothing is worth that outcome. I have to say that in almost all of the cases that I've worked on, and I've done this for 34 years, is these guys who shoot people generally shoot their enemies. And they're very busy shooting their enemies. There's always, some sort of disagreement in the neighborhoods, in the category 1 neighborhoods, the corners whose drugs are being, sold less than the other guy's drugs, who's making more money. There's a lot of gang related shooting. And they have guns because of that. And they also have guns because their neighborhoods are dangerous, but they will not use them in the category 3 neighborhoods. They will not use them, but they'll have them sometimes. And just be aware that the less you say, the better. Don't interact. Don't engage them. Just give them what they want. Don't let them know anything more about you than they already know.
So it sounds like one safety thing is that, as you say, they shoot people, but they shoot their enemies.
Yes.
And if I'm face to face with an armed person trying to take my car, trying to take my wallet, the worst thing I can do is say something that in that moment makes that amped up, testosterone fueled, probably high kid think I'm his enemy.
Right.
Because I annoyed him, or I scared him, or I insulted him in front of his friend.
Right.
That's the
Exactly.
I want to shut up and do what I'm told to the degree that I can do so and keep my family safe.
Exactly. The quick example I have of that is one of these groups that took the $5,000 Rolex from the lawyer went on to rob a younger man's watch, I think they figured, oh, watches are a thing, and they didn't know that, you know, that watch was worth that much money until probably after the fact. But that guy started laughing. He says, "You want my watch? It's broken and it's a Kenneth Cole." And he got hit on the head with the gun. It's because he made fun of them. He should have just said nothing. Let them think it was don't tell them that they're not getting the goods. Let them think that it's a $5,000 watch. Just don't talk.
Just keep the situation as simple as possible and as short as possible. Sounds right. Yeah. And in that regard, there's one situation that that law enforcement officers often stress when talking to people about self-defense, and that's avoiding crime scene number 2, where the bad guy wants to take you from where he finds you to a second location. And I think it's important to point out that is the point where you do not do what you're told.
Exactly.
That you never, ever, 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 ever leave where the bad guy finds you.
Exactly.
Unless you're running away.
Exactly.
Reasons
and I hope you
being
have
that
somebody else to talk about that.
yes, absolutely. It's reasons for that being that if they're willing to hurt you to get you to this isolated location, they're not going to not hurt you when you're at the isolated location.
Correct.
And if they hurt you there in front of your car, you're much closer to medical attention.
Exactly.
And so, but if they want to take your kids, they want to take you, it's time to have another plan. But if all they want is their stuff, sounds like what you're saying, be quick, be quiet, get it over with, and move on with your day. This is not a place for our egos to take the front seat and get behind the wheel.
Right. Right. And I think probably having your children with you does make that a little bit harder, because you may feel more indignant. You may feel more empowered. Your children are watching.
You don't want your kids to see you being weak.
Right.
But you want your kids to see you being smart.
You can talk to them about that later.
Yeah, we're actually having another episode later on about applying some squad tactics ideas with your kids, and have that conversation before that happens, where you talk to your kids and said, when the bad guy comes, if he wants my watch, he can have my watch. He can't have you. And then the kids get to see you doing the right thing, doing the smart thing, the safe thing in real time in those situations. And I think that can maybe help us keep our egos in check in that, because even though we do, especially the fathers, we have that kind of silverback.
Oh, the mothers
impulse.
do too. The mothers do too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I always sense it's less about ego and more about protecting the cubs.
Protection. Nothing more rabid than a protective mother.
Which I'm sure also does deter some criminals, because you don't want to get between a mom and her kids. That's true of bears, and it's true of people.
Which may be one of the reasons that the criminals tend to stay away from that group configuration.
Outstanding. Well, Linda, this has been a really, really informative talk, and I want to thank you so much for coming on board today. Folks, we can look in the show notes, find out how to support Linda's book project. And thank you, Linda. Thank you, viewers. And we'll see everybody next time. Thank you for watching our show today. I hope you found something useful. If you have any questions about what you saw, please do leave them in the comments below. Myself, our guest, or our community will do our best to get those answers for you. If we don't know them ourselves, we will go find someone who knows them. If you loved us, please do hit the like button and the subscribe button. They make a bigger difference than you're thinking right now. And of course, go ahead and click on some of those videos YouTube is suggesting to you right now. We have a lot of stuff that we've worked hard on and are proud of, and hope that you'll enjoy them too. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.